Good morning, college football. Is Notre Dame a top 5 team in 2024? Head coaches on the hot seat, the new college football playoff format confirmed, plus news and notes from around the country after the stinger. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Good Morning College Football. I am Nicholas Ian Allen. Thank you for joining us today, Wednesday, February 21st. We are, I believe, 183 days counting down until week 0 kicks off this season. Notre Dame will again be there at the very beginning, and they're a team that we're going to focus on today. Is Notre Dame a top 5 team heading into 2024, according to at least one, set of rankings, way too early rankings. There seems to be some optimism that they are. So we will dig into that a little bit later. But if you haven't already, please do check out the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. If you're streaming this on Twitter, we would, of course, love for you to subscribe to that YouTube channel. We are hoping to get 4,000 subscribers ahead of the NFL draft. And also, if you're unfamiliar with Campus to Canton, it is a college fantasy football company that is playing the C2C format, which encompasses both college and NFL players. If you would like to join a league, a great place to find out more information is the Campus to Canton Discord, which is available to all of our members, all of our membership tiers. And if you are interested in signing up for as little as $2.99 per month, you'll also get access to tons of content on the site, including a wide range of numbers and databases. And we've got a lot of options for membership tiers, including our C2C Winning Edge tier and our All 22 package, which includes a lot of the stuff that I work on a day-to-day basis, including returning production, our FBS team profiles, which we are really ramping up, getting going, hoping to publish those. Don't have a firm date just yet, but should know a little bit more next week on what time this spring, what part of spring you can expect to have access to our updated 2024 team profiles. Our 2023 team profiles are still being updated daily based on transfers, any injury news, things along those lines. But we are very much looking forward to having our 2024 sheets available as soon as we possibly can. Again, if you'd like to support this show, make sure we're able to keep it going each weekday morning. Drop us a like on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel. I would also love your feedback. If you've got questions on any topics, if you've got suggestions for a team of the day, we try to highlight at least one team each day, try to spend 10 to 15 minutes on it, and Notre Dame will be that team today. But on to the news. The 5+7 format has been confirmed by the College Football Playoff Brain Trust. There had been the expansion plan had been in place, moving, of course, from 4 teams to 12, starting in the 2024 season, 2025 playoff. The 6+6 conference champions was expected to be the format until the Pac-12 basically started to fall apart. So the current setup will include the 5 highest ranked conference champs, not the 6 as it previously was. So there won't be a likely Pac-12 conference champ automatically getting a spot. Of course, Washington State, Oregon State, the only teams who will be identifying as part of the Pac-12 in 2024. But also this format that is now official was long expected, will not allow multiple Group of 5 conference teams to get into the mix. So last year, Conference USA, Liberty was the team that was highest ranked coming in. A team like SMU from the American could have potentially snuck in as that second highest rated conference champ if it were the 6+6. But that won't be the case moving forward now officially. The top four conference champions get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. And this is a little bit controversial, it seems like, for some. We won't spend a ton of time digging into all the what if scenarios and things like that. To be quite honest, I'm not super, opinionated one way or the other personally about the playoff format. I know a lot of people are and certainly understand that. But for me, I mean, I do kind of like the idea of the conference champions getting a bid. And there will be some people who very much disagree, fall more on the line of, make sure we have the best four teams. The top four teams should get the buys. But, I feel like conference champs, it plays into a little bit more of the, be rewarded for playing the games. And if you are able to win your conference championship, I think that a first round bye is a pretty solid reward. So we'll have plenty of time to dig into this, of course, over the next several months and years, quite honestly. So we won't spend a ton of time on it today. Perhaps the biggest piece of news, especially as it impacts the transfer portal, late last evening, there were reports that a 3-year starter on the offensive line, most recently left tackle at SMU, Marcus Bryant, entered the transfer portal. Bryant started 29 games for the Mustangs, played 42 games in total, beginning in 2020 as a true freshman. He is a Texas native, 3-year starter, as I mentioned, at left tackle. Big, literally big offensive lineman, of course, 6'8", in the 320 range, was a first-team all-conference selection for the conference champion SMU Mustangs last season, who are transitioning to the ACC. Bryant is the second SMU starter on the offensive line to enter the transfer portal in recent weeks. Center Branson Hickman did earlier. And though the returning production numbers are still pretty good for SMU as a whole, the Mustangs rank number 12 in our current adjusted overall returning production numbers. They are fourth in the new look ACC, but the offensive line is a little bit of a question mark with this departure. Assuming Bryant moves on, the Mustangs now return 52% of offensive line snaps and 50% of O-line starts from last season. That includes 3 separate players who made double-digit starts on last season's unit, and 2 of those players, as we said, Bryant and Hickman, are leaving voluntarily, leaving with eligibility remaining, moving on to other opportunities potentially. Not sure exactly what's driving this decision for either player. And with SMU moving up to a power conference, you think, well, that kind of takes away one of the most cited reasons why a player like this, who is highly experienced, has really forged a bond with teammates, you have to imagine, over those last 3 years. SMU in a pretty good position as far as continuity and overall experience on the roster this year, has the potential, I think, to make some noise in a new conference, in a new Power 5, Power 4 conference. But where might he land? Who might be interested in a player like Marcus Bryant? And 6'8", 320-pound, 3-year starters certainly are few and far between. So the easy answer to that is probably everyone. Every FBS team is going to be interested in a player like Marcus Bryant. Offensive lineman, rebuilding along the offensive line is vital, and you can't have too many. You can't have too many experienced players. You can't have too many just overall offensive linemen. And I was reading through various stories, as I often do, before the show, after the show each day, and there was a Gopher Illustrated mailbag with Ryan Burns about 24 hours ago, a 247 site. It was just, skimming through, and sometimes something like that will kind of create a spark in my mind of like, oh, that's a number I should look into. And we discussed Minnesota's win total from FanDuel and how it was a little bit low. 4.5 was what was posted. That seems low to me. And a reader asked Burns about that win total, and he mentioned, a little bit of a surprise because, one reason Minnesota has a lot of consistency coming back, a lot of continuity on the offensive and defensive lines. And, as a fantasy focused company at Campus Can, we definitely do dig into offensive line numbers. We do have an interest in college football as a whole, and sometimes continuity on the defensive line is a somewhat overlooked factor, because as much as a experienced offensive line player entering the transfer portal is going to get a lot of interest, defensive linemen very, very similar. So that sparked an idea. I ran some quick numbers earlier this morning. Haven't really had a ton of time to dig into them, so we'll do that a bit later today and talk about it in more detail on the CFB Winning Edge podcast, which we'll be recording later this evening and publishing Thursday morning, most likely. But took a look at what teams bring back the most starts, most snaps, I should say, on average on the offensive line, defensive line, and kind of helps answer this question specifically about Brian a little bit. Who are the teams in most desperate need? What teams are the most perhaps highly motivated to go after a player like Marcus Bryant? So, it's easy usually to think, okay, guys moving up to, wants to go to maybe a blue blood program or a team that has a long track record of success when they make a move like this. You also often, or at least I certainly do, one of the first things that comes to mind is, where is this player from? Will that help drive, especially if it's a player who moved away from home for their first few years of college football? Would they have a personal reason to want to move back a little bit closer to home? That might not be the case here for Bryant. It sounds like he's a Round Rock native. Played his first 3 years in Dallas at SMU. So, everybody in the country, I'm sure, is interested, including a couple of playoff teams. Michigan and Washington are very, very much on the extreme low end as far as offensive line returning production, and really neither of those teams have added very much experience to their groups, outside via the transfer portal. So, Washington loses all of its offensive line starts, according to our current numbers. Washington and Mississippi State are the only Power 5 teams, if our numbers are correct, that have lost every single start from last year's roster. Washington ranks lowest with 3.1% of its O-line snaps returning, but they have added a bit through the transfer portal. Jed Fish, new head coach there, has added roughly 8% of last year's snaps back through the portal. Mississippi State much higher in those categories, over 50% added to the group. So maybe they're not in quite as desperate of need. But could Marcus Bryant want to move to the SEC? I think that's a possibility. But the other power, playoff team is the defending national champions, Michigan, who brings back about 13% of last year's overall snaps, according to our numbers. 6.5% of starts, have added some experience, about 15%, 15.5 to 16% of snaps and starts from last year's numbers via the transfer portal, but still plenty of opportunity. Would absolutely, I think, be interested in a player like Marcus Bryant. So I'm sure we will learn more, but don't be surprised if those teams in the most desperate need are checking in. A team like Oklahoma has been very active in the portal, adding offensive linemen, that could certainly be a spot of interest. A couple of more, home state teams, interconference, well, not interconference actually, but power conference teams from the Big 12, Houston and TCU are both on the pretty low end as far as losing offensive linemen from last season. TCU's been very active in the portal, Houston a little less so, and you could argue that, why would a player leave SMU for Houston right now? Expect that SMU is going to be, probably the better team, more competitive team. Alabama is definitely a team that could be interested. They lose or only bring back about 31 to 34% of starts and snaps respectively, have brought in over 20% of snaps via the portal, but still certainly some opportunities. So Marcus Bryant right now probably going to be the most highly sought after player in the portal, regardless of position. And part of that is because we've seen a lot of players, find their landing spots. But even if he were to have done this in December, would have been a very, very highly sought after player. Following that story up, we did get some clarification on potentially, from a fantasy standpoint, what position designation is Oronde Gadsden II going to have in 2024. Jared Palmgren and Chris K both. We talk about these items in the Campus Canton CFF Slack channel. Sometimes, a news item, a headline will catch our eye, one of us, and don't really have time to dig into it. There was a podcast episode from Syracuse.com that popped up a few days ago, and we discussed it in the channel. Wondered if anybody had the time to sit and listen and see if there was anything of importance that they'd be able to report back. And both Chris and Jared dug into it, and were very interested to hear that Brent Axe and Emily Liker of Syracuse.com interviewed new offensive coordinator Jeff Nixon for the most recent episode of their show. And Brent Axe, reporter there in Syracuse, did, as Jared tweeted out, the Lord's work for the college fantasy community, directly asking Nixon about Syracuse's tight end room, in which, quote, Nixon was quoted as saying, Oronde is a tight end for us. So maybe, general college football fans, those who haven't played college fantasy football, which, first of all, you should. It's a lot of fun. But this is big news, because Oronde Gadsden II, a couple of years ago, was Syracuse's go-to wide receiver. Last year, was listed as a tight end on the official Syracuse roster. So because of that, was given tight end position designation in fantasy leagues. And that's a big deal, even if a guy is not, lining up in line very often. There certainly are some folks in the fantasy community, NBC Sports, Eric Froton, highly respected, very successful college fantasy football player. Prop bets about the best in the business, I have to imagine, is very, very much opposed to a player like Oronde Gadsden, who, even though it was a very small sample size before he got injured last season, did technically, according to Froton's research, line up in exactly 0 snaps in line as an inline tight end for Syracuse last season. It looks like, according to our numbers, where was he? Yeah, 13 snaps in the slot, 6 snaps out wide on pass plays, 19 total snaps, unfortunately, before suffering a season-ending injury. But hey, we weren't 100% sure what position he would be playing, what the new coaching staff would think. Dan Villari, who played tight end last year, converted quarterback, also did a lot of unique things with him, the previous staff at that position. Will Gadsden actually line up in line? Yeah, maybe not too much, but regardless, he is certainly one of the most talented players on the Syracuse roster, son of a longtime NFL wide receiver. He's an offensive weapon who has a pretty diverse skill set, has lined up as an inline tight end at times in 2022 specifically. But good clarification here to know that he will be playing that position, at least officially or according to the coaching staff. So something to keep an eye on. We've mentioned a couple of recent CFF mock drafts. Gadsden this time last year was pretty solid number 2 tight end behind Brock Bowers. And there are certainly some folks who expected that because he didn't play a whole lot of actual tight end, was featured more like a wide receiver, that perhaps he had even more value than a player like Bowers. So he is a bit lower at this part in the early offseason, but now that we know for sure, it sounds like that he's going to keep that tight end designation. Don't be surprised if he climbs up a little bit higher in the ADP numbers, especially once we get some reports out of spring and later in the summer that he's healthy, fully healthy and back and ready to go. So hopefully that is the case. Hopefully he is progressing. And again, thanks to Jared and Chris K for tracking down that information, because a lot of CFF minded folks certainly are interested in it. Speaking of tight ends, Matthew McGavich of Louisville Report passed along some quotes from head coach Jeff Brom a few days ago. If you weren't paying attention, the Cards have really addressed the tight end position through the transfer portal, bringing in 3 tight end transfers, experienced transfers from the portal, adding them to the 2024 roster. Mark Redmond from San Diego State, believe he started his career at Washington. Kentucky rival Isaiah Cummings is coming in, and also Jaleel Skinner, who was a highly rated tight end recruit at the University of Miami. All 3 have signed with Louisville, are expected to play for the Cards in 2024, and that's a position of need. It was a bit of a disappointing position for this Louisville offense, especially compared to what Jeff Brom and his coaching staff had done at Purdue, also at Western Kentucky prior to that. Tight ends had been pretty consistent and pretty productive as receivers. So last year, certainly wasn't a focus, wasn't a highly productive area for Brom, but it was a priority, it sounds like. So quoting here from McGavich's piece, this is Brom earlier this month. I think that position is vital to our success. When you look into a lot of great football teams, a lot of great NFL teams, they've got great tight ends. You've got to have somebody that can control inside the hashes, can stretch the field vertically if you have to, make physical catches in between linebackers and safeties, and we want that. So we've worked hard to, at least on paper, improve that position. So in addition to those transfer tight ends, Louisville does also bring back Nate Kuriski, who had 18 catches last year, 2 touchdowns. Dwayne Martin, who's noted as the best blocker at the position, according to McGavich. And Jamari Johnson, who was an exciting freshman recruit last year, who I think has shown some signs that he could develop into a productive receiver as well. Plus, incoming true freshman Dylan Messman will be in the mix. But continuing here from Brom and quoting again from the piece, I just think in general we feel like once we get to the summer, we're going to have more weapons at that position. It'll provide great competition. We can utilize those guys, and that can help in our passing game. It can be a little more efficient, a little more explosive, and help our receivers get a little bit more open. And I think we need that. Without question, that's a very important position in our offense. So lot of tight end talk. Tight ends can be somewhat controversial in fantasy circles. There are some folks who are pretty vocal saying that, should eliminate the position altogether. I've always had a soft spot for tight ends, played a little tight end long ago, coached a little bit of tight end very briefly as well. But it's an interesting position. It's evolved a lot. When I watch football closely, one of the things that I like to pay attention to is what are some of the unique ways that a particular offense utilizes a tight end. It's certainly not, put your hand in the dirt 98% of the time anymore, even though guys are not playing a large percentage of their snaps in line anymore. Still the tight end, being used as a wing, as a slot, as a player out of the backfield, have some fullback duty type things. It's a really interesting position. And I did like that Brom mentioned, one of the things that they're looking from their tight ends is to help the receivers get open a little bit, to be perceived as a weapon, a threat at the tight end position. That's going to help the receivers. And Jeff Brom, as good as his offenses have been at tight end, they've also produced highly, highly productive wide receivers, especially at the top end of that position in terms of fantasy. So moving on, we mentioned yesterday that Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports had a pretty information-packed column late last week, and didn't have time to really focus on the coaches that he mentioned as being on the hot seat. And there probably weren't, he mentioned 4 names prominently. I would say 3 of them I wholeheartedly agree with are very much, the coaches that need to win. That there was a lot of conversation, especially towards the end of last season, would they be able to survive and make it to 2024? And Billy Napier at the University of Florida is probably top of mind for everyone as far as this conversation goes. As Dodds wrote out, the Gators gave up 4.84 yards per rush in 2023, which is the most since at least 1989. That's just one item of note. There's been a lot of discussion that the offense has been a bit disappointing, even though Graham Mertz, I think, did play pretty well last year before getting hurt for Florida. The simple fact of the matter is Florida just has not won enough under Billy Napier. It's only going to get tougher with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC. Of course, the biggest conference rival, Georgia, has emerged as one of the elite programs in college football. That makes things a little more difficult, and I'm sure for the Florida fan base, even more irksome than just being 5-7, which frankly, at Florida, is basically unforgivable. So a program like Florida, with the access to talent, with the history that it has, you just can't go 5-7 and expect to keep your job. So Billy Napier absolutely is on the top of the list, on top of everyone's mind, coaching for his job this year. The good news, if you're a Florida fan, if you think that they might have an opportunity to bounce back, I mentioned Mertz, second year as a transfer. That's something that the last couple of years, there's been a really, really high hit rate as far as, second year quarterback transfers coming in, taking a big jump in year 2. It's not universal, and definitely some of these players are somewhat rare, but not saying Graham Mertz is Michael Penix or Bo Nix or Caleb Williams, a little bit of a special case, but or even Jane Daniels, of course, second year explodes and wins the Heisman Trophy. Not saying Graham Mertz is going to do that, but as an 11-game starter, getting that under his belt, getting a full year in the program, getting to know his teammates a little bit better. Will he be able to build on a pretty solid year? Nearly 2,900 yards, 20 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, over 8 yards per pass attempt, which is pretty good, especially since the average depth of target was kind of on the low side at 6.7, but a very high completion percentage, as you would expect with a lower average depth of target. But going to be able to work with a fairly experienced group, even though they do lose top receiver Ricky Pearsall, Eugene Wilson III, exciting player as a true freshman last year. Khalil Jackson was able to step up and do some good things. Brought in a receiver that Mertz has a history with, and Chimere Dike from Wisconsin. Interesting to see how he steps into this new offense. And at the tight end position, there's some things to like in Arliss Boardingham, certainly, who had 26 catches, 289 yards, and 4 touchdowns last year. Pretty solid running game. Should thinned out a little bit with Trevor Etienne transferring out, but Montrell Johnson Jr. is back after running for over 800 yards and 5 scores last year. So, offensively, Florida, I think, there's a lot to like. And the defense, the returning production numbers are even better on that side of the ball. So will that be enough? Will Florida be able to navigate a difficult schedule that includes a non-conference opener against Miami, another non-conference game against a talented UCF team, and then, of course, Florida State at the end of the season. That game is in Tallahassee. They do have to play at Texas this year. I mean, this November is just absolutely brutal. Basically, the second half of the season is just bonkers for Florida. Starting on October 12th at Tennessee, then home against Kentucky. They do get a week off as usual prior to the game against Georgia in Jacksonville. That's November 2nd. Then at Texas, home against LSU, home against Ole Miss, and at Florida State. Whew, I mean, that's I think even more than maybe some of the lack of success in the recruiting trail, maybe some swings and misses in the transfer portal, whatever. The biggest issue, the biggest thing standing in the way of Florida having a real bounce back year, they may be a much, much better team on the field. I mean, last season they ranked 55th in our overall returning production numbers. Big part of that was they were 80th on the defensive side of the ball. I expect they will take a step forward defensively, but this might be a better team. To maybe they play, top 35, top 30 in our team performance numbers this year. But will the record be that much different? Man, I mentioned the back half of the schedule, and then in the front half they have to play Miami, as I mentioned, also Texas A&M, who I think is going to be a better team this year. Really, the only automatic win on the roster is week 2 against Samford, FCS opponent. And Samford's a pretty good FCS team. It's going to be very, very tough. So I definitely do understand, especially if the Florida Gators come up short of a bowl game, come up short of a winning record, a real bounce back season. Billy Napier, top of this list, makes some sense, unfortunately. Arkansas's Sam Pittman. There was a lot of smoke at the end of last season that perhaps his job was very much on the line. Arkansas might have been willing to move beyond him. Made kind of a curious hire, bringing back former Arkansas head coach Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator. Help try to spark that unit. But also makes sense. In Arkansas, similar to Florida, it is only going to get tougher, as far as strength of schedule goes, with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma to the conference. And Arkansas does play Texas this year. They do avoid Oklahoma, but a non-conference game, travel to Oklahoma State in early September. They do West teams, Auburn, Texas A&M, neutral field for the A&M game as usual at Auburn this year. They host LSU at Mississippi State, home against Ole Miss, home against Texas. They get the rivalry game at Missouri at the end of the season. Missouri, top 10 team in a lot of folks' minds. And the home game against Tennessee. So Arkansas's schedule is maybe not as brutal as Florida's, but I can imagine that when our strength of schedule numbers come out, when our team profiles are done later this spring, Arkansas is going to be pretty high on the list with Florida. Dave Aranda from Baylor, who just hasn't won enough the last 2 years, as Dodds pointed out. There have been a lot of coaching changes, even more so since this piece was posted, as Alabama brought on to Baylor coaches over the weekend. And he mentioned Clark Lee at Vanderbilt, which, I mean, we mentioned 2 SEC teams already. I feel like Clark Lee, even though last season went poorly, very poorly. I'm not an insider at Vanderbilt, and 2-10 and winless in the SEC is not good for anybody's, job getting any sort of, my mind just went blank. What's the word I'm looking for here? Security. Nevertheless, Vanderbilt, a little bit of an interesting case. Lee being a Vanderbilt alum, I think, is a factor. There is sort of a long-term look, hopefully, behind the scenes there as the program. But he's got to show some improvement. And Vanderbilt as a whole has to show some improvement. And the returning production numbers are not good. So last year, the team obviously did not win very much. Vandy, as of right now, ranks 12th in the SEC in our adjusted returning production numbers. So below FBS average. They've done a decent amount in the portal. That's actually kind of helped to boost the numbers quite a bit. If we look at just raw returning production, just who's coming back, who's not from 2023, Vandy ranks 95th overall and 115th on the offensive side of the ball. So not necessarily great news there. So it does make sense, especially if there's another 2-10 winless SEC season. Then yeah, you could see that Vandy might be willing to move on. But so these 4, yeah, it makes sense that these are the 4 top 10 stats list. I was trying to think and go through my own list, who would stick out to me as potential hot seat coaches, and who's going to end up getting fired. Could be just about anybody. Things can go bad quickly for any head coach. We can see a situation where a team was a top 20 type team, ends up having some bad luck, injury luck, or something just goes wrong, and they end up 4-8, and any coach almost might get fired in that situation. But where are some things maybe trending a little bit in the wrong direction, and a program might be looking to make a move? The first thing that came to mind for me was Kalani Sitake at BYU. There was a real high point in 2020 for BYU on the field, and the move to the Big 12 was big for the program, but the wins have slid, and last year BYU was a little disappointing as far as my own expectations go. This year, like the SEC is getting tougher. I think the Big 12 very much so. There are a lot of teams in the mix who could end up winning the league or competing for a conference championship, and BYU is kind of low on the list. So if there's another losing season, miss a bowl game, it would not shock me if BYU were looking in another direction. Will a coach like Shane Beamer, at South Carolina, who excelled, overachieved the first couple of years in Columbia and as a head coach, and a very likable person, from the outside looking in. Sometimes guys get on the hot seat and there's a little bit more pressure from the fan base beyond just wins and losses. Maybe Shane Beamer's able to help keep some of that at a distance. But if you don't win at a place like South Carolina, where it gets increasingly tougher to win, with the addition, the expansion of teams like Texas and Oklahoma, would another disappointing season mark the end of his tenure? I think it's possible, hopefully not likely. But one that jumped out, pardon me, from the group of five, I think Will Hall at Southern Miss, a proud program that's had a lot of success in its history, but a bit of a bumpy ride in recent years. Will Hall did, a pretty commendable job, especially in 2020, 2021, 2022, showing some improvement, making things competitive when the quarterback situation was just a complete disaster. But part of that is, hey, why did the quarterback position become such a disaster? Need to see some improvement there. Bit of a disappointing season last year, coming off a bowl bid in 2022. So I think that he was top of mind as far as things kind of trending in the wrong direction, and another disappointing non-bowl season probably might be it for him. And then, we've got to be on retirement watch as well. Would Mac Brown be ready to hang it up? Kirk Ferentz at North Carolina and Iowa, respectively. North Carolina is very low on returning production. We're going to have Brandon Sanders on tomorrow, actually, as a guest and talk some North Carolina. Would be curious to get his thoughts as someone close to the program, pays a lot of attention. Might a poor season, poor record, big step back, mark the end for Mac Brown potentially, and then at Iowa, Kirk Ferentz, who's won a lot despite some really poor offensive performances, especially in recent years. But much like we mentioned with the SEC getting tougher, the Big Ten is continuing to get tougher. I think there's actually a path to Iowa having a really great year. And there's a video coming out with Felix Sharp, Chris Moxley, and myself talking about some dark horse playoff contenders. I brought up Iowa as a potential team because they are high in returning production. They do get their starting quarterback back from injury, so boost those numbers up even a little bit more. Expect another very, very good defense. So will they be able to win enough and sneak into an expanded playoff? I think there's a possibility, but if things go poorly, and Ferentz is the longest tenured coach in college football, has been for a while, and wouldn't be a shock if he ends up deciding to retire and move on, regardless of how the season plays out. So a couple of more notes before we dig into Notre Dame here at the end, but we mentioned a Northwestern transfer in the secondary to West Virginia yesterday. We've got the second in 2 days as Garnett Hollis has made that move as well. And then just a couple of tweets that got me thinking yesterday. Bud Elliott, who we love here, of 247 Sports, Cover 3 podcast, CBS Sports, he took a look at Daniel Jeremiah, who's one of the smartest NFL draft folks out there for NFL.com, had his most recent mock draft, second mock draft. And Bud Elliott went through and took a look at who Jeremiah had listed as his first round projections. There were 32 players. 27 of them, according to Elliott's research, were not transfers. And those 5 transfers, things kind of not necessarily necessitated, but there were explanations for why they transferred. One was not medically cleared by his original school. That's Leatu Latu, the highly, highly productive pass rusher, most recently at UCLA. 2 transferred when a head coach left. That's, of course, Caleb Williams, followed Lincoln Riley to USC. Also, Jaden Daniels, who, certainly made a smart move of becoming Heisman Trophy winner and likely, looks like maybe a top 5 pick this year, who, the way things were trending at Arizona State, certainly would not have expected that until making the move to LSU and pairing up with 2 of the best wide receivers in the country, who are also first round picks in this mock draft. And the two others were, as Bud Elliott put it, transferred for better exposure. That was A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver, transferring from Georgia to Texas, and Chop Robinson, who started his career at Maryland and went to Penn State as a transfer. So Elliott asked, is there any signal to this? And it's probably too early to say for sure, but I think it is worth noting. And as transfers become even more common each year, it's something to watch for. Will these numbers rise as far as the first round picks, highly drafted players not being or being transfers, have a transfer in their background? Yeah, possibly, because I think the overall number of percentage of players transferring seemingly on the rise. We've had a little bit of a history at the quarterback position specifically of transfers who go on and become number one overall picks. That is nothing new necessarily, but it does make a bit of sense that the guys who are expected to be taken at the top of the NFL draft are probably the players who came in and proved themselves to be the best players on the field immediately at their new school, or were able to be developed into that by a great staff. So something to watch, certainly in this year's NFL draft and in future years as well. And then kind of on a similar note, something that we've been talking about quite a bit, talked about it on this show, on the CFP Winning Edge podcast as well. But there's been a lot of discussion, college coaches leaving for the NFL. Is that becoming more common? It's certainly brought up, things like NIL, things like, the transfer portal, having to re-recruit your roster continuously, are mentioned as potential reasons why a head coach might just say, you know what, I'm going to go to the league and just worry about football and not outside things very much. And I'm sure that's the case for some guys, but it seems like, at least according to numbers that Brandon Marcello, also of 247 Sports, put together, as a whole, maybe the evidence actually suggests that there isn't any major spike of this sort of thing. So Brandon Marcello put together, tweeted this out yesterday. He has a coaching carousel database at 247 Sports, which keeps a lot of this information together, very useful. He dug around in that database and found that 22 FBS coaches have taken NFL jobs in the most recent cycle. 15 NFL coaches have taken FBS coaching jobs. 7 non-major pro sports or pro football, talking about the UFL and CFL coaches, have taken FBS jobs. 7 of those. Last year, according to his information, there were 28 FBS coaches who left for NFL jobs. So maybe this year it's just, more prominent positions, or maybe just a little more noticeable when these things happen. But at least according to Marcello's research, the overall numbers do not suggest that this is a major spark. So major spike. So even though, we'll continue to talk about it, speculate, will this, is this something that we're going to see more of? Maybe we will. But at least as of how it stands comparing last year to this year, the numbers and the research, according to Marcello, is, maybe not actually. All right. With our last 10 or so minutes, we will discuss, hey, is Notre Dame a top 5 team in 2024? If you've been paying attention, following along with the first 10 episodes of Good Morning College Football, our team of the day have mostly been, group of 5 teams. We did start with a couple of the highest calculated teams as far as returning production goes, some of those being power conference teams. Iowa State was very early on that list. We also looked at the extreme low end with Washington, but I've kind of done it a little bit on purpose, and we will sprinkle in some power conference teams throughout, but I kind of wanted to push the, the power conference national title contenders or conference championship contenders a little bit until those team profiles are fully available and I can, speak to what our projections officially say for those type of teams, give a little bit more. These team of the days are really going to evolve, I think, a little bit more into kind of a team preview. And at this point in the early off season, preseason, it's a little early for that. And so a team like Notre Dame, I might want to hold on to a little bit once we know, hey, our numbers think they're a top 10 team. And last year, for the most part, yeah, they did. We were high on Notre Dame. At the very end of the season, they slipped a little bit, in part because of the opt-outs for the bowl game when Sam Hartman did not play. Steve Angeli stepped in at quarterback. Also, Audric Estime did not play in the bowl game. Jeremiah Love got the start there. He and Jadarian Price, we got to see a little bit more. And then there were a lot of wide receivers leaving via the transfer portal. Experienced guys like Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather stepped out. Rico Flores Jr., pretty highly rated receiver as a true freshman, got some playing time last year. Those players moved on to Virginia, Cal, UCLA, respectively. Braylon James, also a freshman last season, has since transferred to TCU. So, some of those opt-outs and talking about the NFL draft, Joe Alt, left tackle, highly projected first-round pick at that position. The final power rating for Notre Dame, they ended up 13th, but they spent a large portion of the season in the top 6 or 7 in our power rankings. And a lot of that was they benefited from a very, very experienced quarterback in Sam Hartman, who had a video game rating, our overall player rating in the CFB Winning Edge team profiles, over 100. That was a big factor. They were solid at the quarterback position. And they were honestly pretty solid throughout. If we just look at raw recruiting ratings on the offensive side of the ball, the players on the Notre Dame roster last season averaged a top 10 rating. The average 247 rating of Notre Dame's offensive players in our database ranked 9th in the country. On the defensive side of the ball, the average 247 rating of defensive players in our database ranked 11th. There were no major holes, no position group outside of the top 25, and only one was outside of the top 20. They also had, top 10 ratings at running back, which was number 2, offensive line, number 3, defensive line, number 6, and for the skill positions combined and the front 7 combined were 9th and 6th respectively. So solid roster across the board. They ranked 24th in roster strength at the end of the year. They were closer to top 10 or in the top 10 for a large portion of last season. They actually finished the season ranked 4th in defensive roster strength. They finished 80th on the offensive side of the ball, but again, that was a lot of those opt-outs, especially at the skill positions and also at the quarterback position. As you, I'm sure, know, Notre Dame has addressed its quarterback turnover. Sam Hartman moving on to a professional career, and the Fighting Irish bring in Riley Leonard as a transfer from Duke. Leonard was limited by injury, certainly suffered a severe ankle injury, or at least a very impactful ankle injury in the game against Notre Dame last season. So he was limited to 7 games. The numbers were not spectacular. Only 1,100 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 6.7 yards per pass attempt. That's a big drop from what Sam Hartman did. He was right up against 9 yards per pass attempt. Had a 24-8 touchdown to interception ratio. Now Riley Leonard does offer a bit more as a runner, especially when fully healthy. So these numbers could have been even better had he not come back for, being injured for his last couple of appearances of the season. But Riley Leonard ran for 352 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns, averaged 6 yards per carry last season. Sam Hartman, sacks, of course, are not counted, or excuse me, are counted in these numbers, but he finished with 123 yards on 45 attempts and 3 touchdowns. So not as explosive of a runner as Riley Leonard, and that'll be a factor. But those passing numbers, because Leonard was injured, and because, quite honestly, there were some games where he didn't play all that well. They don't do when we throw those into the calculation, the returning production numbers, we might be discounting Riley Leonard's impact a bit. So keep that in mind when I say that Notre Dame ranks 98th in adjusted offensive returning production. They rank 91st in overall adjusted returning production. So a healthy Riley Leonard, if you want to factor that in, if you want to look at his 2022 numbers maybe instead of the 2023 numbers, they would boost Notre Dame up a bit. But Estime is going to be a loss, 1,300-yard rusher, 18 touchdowns, even though I do like Love and Price and think that they are going to be a solid combo. Also, we saw Jabron Payne last season. All those guys had 45 or more attempts. We'll see how that shakes out. The receiving core concerns me a little bit. Chris Tyree actually, somewhat surprisingly, ended up being the leader in receiving yards for Notre Dame last season. He was targeted 37 times, caught 26 of those for 484 yards and 3 touchdowns. Rico Flores, as I mentioned, got some playing time as a freshman wide receiver. Tobias Merriweather had a couple of TD catches. Those 3 players are gone. Also, tight end Holden Stays has moved on via the transfer portal. He had 4 touchdown catches. Notre Dame went very, very heavy into the receiving group in the transfer portal. Brought in Chris Mitchell, a transfer from FIU, who had a huge year in an offense that wasn't all that great, playing with a true freshman quarterback on a team that, quite honestly, just wasn't very good. But Chris Mitchell he was targeted 100 times, caught 64 of those for 1,118 yards, averaged 17.5 yards per carry, averaged 13.8 average depth of target. So somebody who can stretch the field. How will that translate to a much tougher, week in and week out schedule, set of opponents? We shall see. But 7 touchdown catches would have led Notre Dame, almost doubled the next closest. Jaden Greathouse, I should say. Sorry, didn't quite double. He had 5. I was referring to Jordan Faison, who's a pretty interesting story as a true freshman. Last season, averaged 16.9 yards per catches, 4 touchdowns, 19 catches on 25 targets. Didn't play nearly as much as he probably will moving forward. But so Chris Mitchell is going to step in, has the potential to be a big play weapon for Riley Leonard. Also brought in Bo Collins from Clemson, who would have been the second, would have been the leading receiver at Notre Dame if we just moved his numbers over from Clemson last year at 510 yards, 3 touchdowns on 38 catches. Jaden Harrison, kind of an intriguing transfer in, a little bit more of an impact potentially on special teams, but transferring in from Marshall, where he had 28 catches, 410 yards, and a touchdown. And the offensive line, is going to have to be reworked quite a bit. Alt, as we said, is out. Blake Fisher also leaving as an early entry to the NFL draft. Zeke Correll, a 10-game starter last season, is transferring out. So that leaves Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan as the returning starters at left guard, right guard, respectively. That unit is going to be a little bit of a concern. Having to keep Riley Leonard healthy and protect him in the passing game and of course create some holes for pretty good, I think, trio of running backs that they've got coming back. Notre Dame also brought in some experienced players defensively. Rod Hurd II, a transfer coming in from Northwestern. Jordan Clark coming in. He's Arizona State, I believe. So, add those guys to a defense that looks a little bit better than middle of the pack in returning production. Adjusted 57th in our returning production number, 75th in raw returning production. But Notre Dame has been aggressive. They rank 20th or 21st in added production, 20th in overall added production, 21st in offensive added production, 20th in defensive added production, according to our numbers. So, getting back to the original question, is Notre Dame a top 5 team? According to our power ratings, I don't think they will be. It's too early to say for sure, but I'm not expecting that Notre Dame will. I think we'll see a little bit of a drop compared to where they were most of last season with Sam Hartman. Riley Leonard, I like a lot, but our numbers, the way we calculate individual player ratings, don't like Leonard quite as much as Sam Hartman. Hartman was a 104 in our player ratings last year. Riley Leonard is probably going to be like a 91. He was a 89.7 last season as a junior. He'll get a little bit of a bump with one more year of experience once we make those adjustments. But there's going to be a little bit of a step down there. The receiving core looks solid. Mitchell, Collins, both of those guys are going to be right around 90 in those overall player ratings. Jaden Harrison's going to be an 82.5. So, the receiving core as a whole might get a little bit of a, tick up in their overall average player rating, once we adjust for experience and production. The raw 247 numbers and on three and rivals and things like that, which we also track, those are probably going to come down a little bit. But those adjustments that we make for experience and production, which benefited Notre Dame last year with Hartman specifically and others, and it played out, fairly well for us. They did rank number 3 in overall team performance last season, a little bit better maybe than you might expect based on the final record, 3 losses. They were top 10 both on offense and on defense. And why was this the question? Top 5 team? Perhaps I probably should have led with that. Notre Dame moved up from number 10 to number 5 in the most recently updated ESPN Way Too Early top 25. Now that is a little bit different than our power ratings, a little bit different than ESPN's SP Plus, where they rank 9th. Also, The Athletic has an early top 25. Stuart Mandel did, where Notre Dame was 9th in the very way too early first one. They were number 7 in the most recent update. But reading from ESPN and why they made the jump from 10 to 5 in the Way Too Early, which is based more on predicted order of finish. That's the main difference here. Power ratings, we don't really care about wins and losses, quite honestly. Who will be favored over who's a stronger, roster, plays the best on the field, all that stuff combined. Who would be favored over who on a neutral field. That's what our team strength numbers care about. That's what SP Plus cares about. That's what some of the other, solid projection systems care most about. This other one, but will Notre Dame, despite maybe not being one of the 10 or top 5 strongest teams across the board in the country, will they finish as a top 5 team? The potential is there. They passed Ole Miss, who now ranks 7th in that list. They passed Missouri. They passed Alabama, who fell from 4th to 9th. They passed Arizona and Michigan, which fell from 6th to 13th. Why? Reading here from the piece, the update from the winner, the Fighting Irish weren't bad in Coach Marcus Freeman's first 2 seasons, winning 19 games, but it's time for them to turn the corner, and Freeman has laid the groundwork by adding former Duke quarterback Riley Leonard, bringing back offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock. That is a big addition, who was that offensive coordinator play caller for Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winner last season, who directed LSU's high-flying offense in 2023. Leonard underwent ankle surgery to repair an injury suffered last season. He's expected to be ready for spring practice in March. We discussed that last week. The Irish also added receivers Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins to shore up an underwhelming receiving core. Finding replacements for bookend tackles Joe Alt and Blake Fisher will be a priority in spring practice. But one of the things that really wasn't mentioned that, will Notre Dame be in this group of, will they be in the playoff in the new setup? There's certainly a chance, and part of that is a fairly manageable schedule. We talked about the SEC teams playing a tougher schedule. A lot of them, the teams on the have coaches on the hot seat specifically. Notre Dame's schedule going a little bit in the more manageable direction. So last year they had 10 wins, lost tough games against Ohio State. Louisville played really, really well at Clemson last season. But tough schedule, especially with that Ohio State game. This year, there isn't an Ohio State. They do have to go to Kyle Field in week 1 to play Texas A&M, but that's a team with a new head coach, so you might perhaps be able to, get Texas A&M before they've really ironed everything out. The non-conference, it's all non-conference for Notre Dame, right? But the early season schedule where most teams are playing non-conference. They have a couple of MAC teams, Northern Illinois and Miami of Ohio in September. Those sandwich a trip to Purdue, who has one of the lowest projected win totals according to FanDuel this year. Perhaps a little bit of a revenge opportunity with a home game against Louisville in September, late September there. Then a week off in the middle, very manageable. Home against Stanford, at Georgia Tech, and a neutral site game against Navy. Another week off in November, and then Florida State is the big, team that's ranked highest, most likely in most models on this schedule. They get an extra week to prepare for a home game against Florida State. They also play Virginia at home, Army at Yankee Stadium, and then the trip to USC to end the season. But this are they going to be heavy underdogs in one game, 2 games, perhaps? So if they're able to navigate a manageable schedule, get the quarterback play, just as good, if not a little bit better than it was last year, rebuild that receiving core, rebuild the offensive line, especially the tackle positions. Notre Dame certainly could play its way into the top 5, into the playoff. Regardless of whether or not they are, considered in power ratings a top 5 type team right now. So we'll have our official numbers a little bit later this spring. We did go a little bit over time today. Apologies for that. But we'll be back tomorrow with Brandon Sanders, talk a little bit of North Carolina, as well as his history as a CFF player, how he got into this sort of thing. Some of the things that he does, to research, work on in the off season. The Future Freshman podcast being a big piece of that. But that's going to wrap it up for us today for CampusToCanton.com, where we do hope you will consider becoming a member for as little as $2.99 per month for the Campus to Canton YouTube channel, where if you would please subscribe, like this video, help us to build some momentum here with this show, as there aren't a whole lot of people who are here every day in middle to late February, like we plan to be. But we very much appreciate your support. I am Nicholas Ian Allen. This has been episode 11 of Good Morning College Football, and we will see you tomorrow.